The vote had passed by a margin of 3. 3 votes out of a council of 49 species. That was how close humanity came to never being trusted with the most dangerous infants in the known galaxy. Ambassador Voss had read the final tally twice, then folded the paper, put it in his coat pocket, and never mentioned it to anyone. Some numbers were better left unspoken. Dara Wells found out about the vote the same way she found out about most things that were above her pay grade, by accident, in a hallway, while someone else was having a conversation they thought was private. She was a xenobiologist, not a diplomat. She studied living things, how they ate, how they breathed, how they grew. She had spent 6 years at Station Hearthlight cataloging alien biology, and she had never once expected that job to include babysitting. She expected it now. Admiral Rowe called the briefing on a Tuesday. The room held 40 people. By the time she finished speaking, the room felt much smaller. The convergence crisis, a gravitational event that happened once every few thousand years, had made several core alien worlds temporarily uninhabitable. Most species had allied races who could shelter their young. The Draxoni had no allies. They were ancient, enormous, fire-blooded predators with a recorded history older than most civilizations combined, and the universe had spent the last several millennia being very careful not to upset them. No one volunteered to help the Draxoni. No one wanted the liability. Humanity had volunteered. The room was quiet for a long time after Rowe finished. Then Foss Riley, who had been leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, said, "How big are we talking?" Rowe pulled up the image. Foss looked at it. "Right," he said, "so big." Dara studied the image more carefully. 3 hatchlings, each one roughly the size of a large dog, though the comparison felt wrong in ways she couldn't immediately explain. They were dark-scaled, long-limbed, with wide flat heads and eyes that caught light strangely. Their tails coiled loosely beneath them. Even in a still photograph, they looked like they were deciding something. The briefing packet said almost nothing useful. Draxoni biology was one of the most guarded secrets in the galaxy. What little was known had been pieced together from observation at a distance. The species did not permit study. What Dara had to work with was a set of environmental requirements, a list of things the hatchlings definitely could not eat, and a single line of cultural context that had been translated 3 times and still didn't quite make sense. She spent the next 3 weeks trying to make sense of it anyway. Foss was assigned as her assistant, a role he accepted with the cheerful ease of a man who had once kept 3 soldiers alive in a collapsed building for 36 hours using field dressings and improvised splints. He read the briefing packet once, set it down, and said, "We figure it out as we go." Dara told him that was not a plan. He told her it was the only one they had. Ambassador Voss arrived 8 days before the hatchlings. He was a narrow man with the particular look of someone who had not slept properly in weeks, and he walked through Station Hearthlight like he was expecting the floor to give way beneath him. He met with Dara for 2 hours. He told her the hatchlings would be disoriented. He told her they would run hot, body temperature well above any species she had worked with. He told her they were not dangerous, and then he paused and added a qualifier that made the first statement mean something different. "They are not dangerous," he said, "when they feel safe." Dara wrote that down. The day the transport docked, half the station found reasons to be somewhere else. The docking corridor was empty except for Dara, Foss, Dr. Inez Balmer from the medical bay, and Admiral Rowe, who stood with her hands clasped behind her back and her face set in the expression she used when she was working very hard not to show anything at all. The cargo doors opened. The heat came first, a dry mineral warmth like standing near stone that had been in the sun all day. Then the smell, something metallic, faintly electric. Then the hatchlings. They came out slowly, not afraid, Dara thought, cautious. There was a difference. They moved together, close but not touching, and their eyes tracked everything. The lights, the walls, the humans standing at the end of the corridor. They stopped when they saw the people and held very still. No one moved. Then the smallest one took 3 steps forward and made a sound, low, resonant, more felt than heard. Dara didn't know what it meant. She didn't think it was a threat. She filed it carefully in the part of her mind labeled things to understand later, which had been getting crowded lately. They got the hatchlings settled into the prepared enclosure. Everything the station had built for them, temperature controls, the reinforced walls, the specialized lighting, seemed to be acceptable. None of it was rejected. None of it was perfect either, Dara could tell, but the hatchlings moved through the space and found corners they liked and eventually, very slowly, lay down. Foss looked at them for a while. Then he said, quietly, so only Dara could hear, "The big one's Bryn, the little one's Soli, the middle one who keeps staring at everything, that's Key." Dara looked at him. "Don't," he said, before she could speak. "I know what you're going to say. We are not naming them. I already named them." She didn't have an answer for that. She turned back to the enclosure. Key was still watching them, amber eyes steady and unblinking, and Dara had the distinct feeling she was being studied just as carefully as she was studying them. She wasn't sure who was learning more. On day 4, Soli stopped eating. It had not eaten much to begin with, small amounts of the mineral compound that Dara had sourced from the station's geological storage based on the Draxoni dietary list. The list was vague. The list had been written by people who had observed the species from very far away and made educated guesses. Dara was beginning to understand that educated guesses about Draxoni biology were about as useful as a weather report from a different planet. Soli sat in the corner of the enclosure and looked at the food and looked away. Bryn and Key ate without complaint, but they watched Soli with the kind of attention that made Dara's chest tight. She spent 36 hours trying different mineral compounds. She catalogued every rejection. She slept 4 hours on the second night and 3 on the third. Foss brought her food at irregular intervals and did not comment on the state of her workspace. Inez solved it by accident. She had been running a diagnostic on the enclosure's air filtration system when she dropped a calibration tool. It skidded across the floor and stopped near Soli's feet. Soli looked at it. Then Soli picked it up, gently, carefully, and put it in its mouth. Inez stood very still. Soli chewed once, twice, then swallowed, then looked at Inez with something that might have been expectation. The calibration tool was made of ferromagnetic steel. Dara stared at the report Inez sent her. Then she went to the geological storage and came back with a tray of raw ore samples, iron-rich, dense, magnetic. She put the tray in front of Soli without a word. Soli ate 3 pieces without pausing. "Ferromagnetic ore," Dara said to no one in particular. "That's what they eat." "That's not on any list anywhere," Foss said. "No," she agreed, "it is not." She added it to her own list, the one that was growing longer and stranger by the day, titled simply, "What We Know Now." The sleep problem surfaced on day 6. The hatchlings would not sleep unless a human was present in the room, not in the enclosure, the room. If the last person left, the hatchlings became still and alert in a way that was different from their normal stillness. Their temperature dropped slightly, their eyes stayed open. They did not make any sound. They simply waited, with the patience of creatures descended from apex predators, for someone to come back. Foss started sleeping on a cot outside the enclosure. He claimed it was fine. He complained about it every morning to whoever would listen and then went back every night without being asked. The Galactic Council review request arrived on day 11. Councillor Draith, a species representative with a long career built on finding fault with humanity's conduct, had filed a formal inquiry. The language was careful and cold. Words like improvised care protocols and undocumented methodology and risk to bonded young. Rowe handled the response. She sent back footage of all 3 hatchlings in good health, eating regularly, sleeping normally, gaining weight at a rate that Inez described as frankly remarkable. Draith did not respond. His silence was not warm. High Speaker Orath received the same footage through a separate channel. He was ancient, the oldest living Draxoni, by the records that existed, and his silence was the kind that had weight to it. Dara did not know what he thought. She did not know if he was pleased or horrified or simply waiting to see what happened next. She tried not to think about him. She had enough to do. By week 3, patterns had begun to form. Bryn, the eldest, had started following Dara during her morning checks. Not closely, a few feet behind, moving when she moved, stopping when she stopped. It was not aggressive. It was not entirely comfortable either. But it was consistent, and consistency in a species she barely understood felt like progress. Soli had become attached to Foss in ways that were increasingly difficult to ignore. The hatchling would climb to the highest point in the enclosure whenever Foss walked in and then look at him from there, as if confirming he was real. Foss had learned to wave when he entered. Soli always responded to the wave by descending. Key observed everything and did nothing that was easy to categorize. Key watched the door. Key watched the cameras. Key watched the other hatchlings and the humans and the equipment and the food. Dara had the feeling Key was building something in its mind, a map, maybe, or a model, a complete picture of the world it had been brought to. She understood that impulse. She was doing the same thing. The report she sent to Roe at the end of week 3 was honest. She wrote that the hatchlings were not just surviving. They were showing behavioral markers that, in every other species she had studied, indicated healthy development, curiosity, social attachment, exploration of the environment. She wrote that she could not fully explain why it was working. The conditions were improvised. The knowledge base was thin. The margin for error had been enormous from the beginning. She wrote, "Something in the human approach to care is reaching them. I do not know if it is warmth or routine or simply proximity. I cannot quantify it. I am certain it is real." She hit send, then she went back to the enclosure. Bryn was waiting near the door. When Dara walked in, the hatchling moved closer than usual, and rested a clawed hand lightly on Dara's wrist. The touch was careful, deliberate. The warmth of it traveled up Dara's arm. She did not move. Bryn did not move. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the filtration system. Then Dara went back to work, and Bryn walked alongside her, and neither of them needed to say anything about what had just happened. Inez found it in the data by chance, the way she found most things that mattered. She had been running a routine audio sweep of the enclosure, standard procedure, looking for signs of respiratory distress or any biological sounds outside the normal range. The sweep came back clean on the audible spectrum, but when she widened the filter out of habit, she found something sitting below the range of human hearing, quiet and steady and unmistakably structured. The hatchlings were talking to each other. Not in any language the station's translation suite recognized, not in anything that matched the few recorded samples of adult Draxoni communication. This was something else, a layered sound, low and complex, with a rhythm that shifted depending on which hatchling was producing it. And woven into it, underneath the alien structure like threads through cloth, were patterns that Inez recognized because she had been hearing them every day for 2 months. Human vocal patterns, cadence, rhythm, the shape of sentences even without the words. She sat with the data for a long time before she went to Dara. She did not file an official log. She brought the file on a personal reader, closed the door of Dara's small office, and played it quietly. Dara listened without speaking. She listened to it twice. Then she said, "How long has this been in the data?" "At least 3 weeks, Inez said. "Maybe longer. I wasn't filtering for it before." Dara was quiet again. Outside the office, through the window that looked into the main corridor, a pair of station technicians walked past, laughing at something. The ordinary world, going about its business unaware. "Don't log it yet," Dara said finally. "I want to watch them for a few more days first." Inez nodded. She understood without being told. If the information got out before they understood what it meant, it would be taken out of their hands. It would become political. Everything that touched the Draxoni program became political eventually, but she and Dara both wanted more time before that happened. They got 12 days. In those 12 days, Foss taught Soli a clapping game. It had started as an accident. He had been clapping dust off his palms after moving equipment, and Soli had watched with the focused intensity it brought to all things. Foss had done it again, slower, watching the hatchling watch him. Soli had extended one clawed foreleg and tapped it against the other. So Foss had turned it into a game. Clap, pause, clap, clap, pause, over and over, patient and consistent, the way he had learned to be with everything that couldn't tell you what it needed. It took 12 tries, Foss counted, before Soli matched the pattern exactly. On the 13th try, Soli got it perfect, and then produced a sound at the end. Short, sharp, from somewhere in the throat. Not quite a word, not quite not. Foss stayed very still. "Yeah," he said softly, "you like that." Soli did the clap pattern again and made the sound again at the end. Different pitch this time, exploring it. Foss reported this to Dara the same evening, with the tone of a man trying very hard to be scientifically neutral. He was not succeeding. Dara had begun reading aloud during her evening checks. She had not planned to. It had started one night when she was tired and had nothing useful left to do, and had pulled up an old text on her reader, one of the books she'd had since childhood, something her father used to read to her. She had read 3 pages out loud before she noticed Bryn had moved to the closest point of the enclosure and was listening with absolute stillness. She kept going. She felt ridiculous. She kept going anyway. Every evening after that she brought the reader. Bryn was always at the near wall before she started. Soli would settle somewhere high up and curl there with eyes half closed, but ears, or whatever the Draxoni equivalent was, clearly tracking every sound. Key sat precisely in the middle of the enclosure and looked at Dara with that steady, cataloguing gaze. On the 23rd day of the 12-day watch, Ambassador Voss delivered the news. The convergence crisis was resolving faster than projected. The homeworld was becoming habitable again. The hatchlings would be collected in 30 days. The station held a small, informal celebration. Someone brought food to the common room. People were laughing and relieved. It was good news. Everyone knew it was good news. Dara went to the enclosure. She sat on the floor outside the barrier and did not read and did not run checks. She just sat. Bryn came to the near wall and lay down on the other side of it, close. Soli descended from the high perch and settled a few feet away. Key did not move from the center, but turned to face her. 30 days. She had known this was temporary from the beginning. She had known it the way you know any practical fact, clearly, logically, without feeling. And then somewhere between the ferromagnetic ore and the clapping game and 300 pages of her father's old books, read aloud to creatures who had no reason to care, the feeling had caught up with the fact. She sat there for an hour. Key made a sound, not the subaudible frequency, not the clapping game sound, something new, softer, directed entirely at Dara across the space between them. Dara looked up. Key held her gaze. The sound came again, unhurried. She didn't know what it meant. She wrote it down when she got back to her office, the way she wrote everything down, and then she sat at her desk for a while, not writing anything else. When Foss knocked on the door later and asked if she was okay, she said yes. He looked at her for a moment. He knew her well enough by now, but he let it go, and she was grateful because she didn't have the right words yet for what she was trying not to feel. Nobody warned Dara that High Speaker Orath was coming in person. She found out the same time the rest of the station did 3 hours before his transport docked, and spent those 3 hours doing what she always did when something large and uncontrollable was heading her way, which was checking every reading in the enclosure twice and making sure Foss had eaten something. The observation party arrived with the kind of quiet that powerful things carry when they move through spaces that aren't built for them. Orath was taller than any image had suggested. He walked the way old things walk, not slowly, but with the certainty of something that does not need to rush. Behind him, Councillor Draith moved with a recording team and the expression of a man who had already written his conclusions and was here to gather evidence. Voss positioned himself between them like a man standing in a doorway he was not sure would hold. Orath asked to walk the enclosure, just him and Dara, no translators, no recording teams. Rowe approved it before Dara could object, which was probably the right call. They walked together for 20 minutes in something close to silence. Orath watched the hatchlings. The hatchlings watched Orath. Bryn stayed near Dara's side the entire time, which Dara noticed and did not know what to do with. Orath noticed it too. She could tell by the way he paused briefly when Bryn moved to put itself between Dara and the elder. Not threatening, just present, just between. Orath said nothing. They completed the walk. He stepped back to the observation area and the formal proceedings began. The handoff was scheduled for the following morning. This walkthrough was meant to be documentation, health checks, behavioral notes, confirmation that the hatchlings were fit for transport. Draith's team had clipboards. Draith had opinions he hadn't voiced yet, which was somehow worse than when he voiced them. Voss ran the health checks. He moved through them the way he moved through everything, calmly, steadily, talking to the hatchlings in the low voice he'd developed over months of cot sleeping and clapping games. Soli tracked him from across the enclosure the whole time. When he finished and stood up straight, Soli crossed the space between them and climbed, slow and deliberate, up onto the equipment case beside him until they were at eye level. Voss looked at Soli. Soli looked at Voss. The room was still doing other things. Draith's team was recording. Inez was cross-referencing her medical notes. Voss was watching everything with the expression of a man waiting for an explosion. And then Soli opened its mouth and spoke. The word was clear, accented strangely, shaped by a throat that was not built for human language, but unmistakable. One word, an English word. Stay. Voss stopped breathing. The room did not go quiet because everything in it had already been quiet, but the quality of the silence changed. It became a different kind, the kind that happens when everyone present understands at the same moment that something has just occurred that cannot be taken back. Draith lowered his recorder. Voss made a sound like a man who had been holding his breath for several weeks. Bryn turned to Dara. Dara, who had not moved since the word left Soli's mouth, who was standing very still with both hands at her sides and her face doing something complicated that she was not in control of. Bryn looked at her for a long moment, amber eyes steady, reading her the way Dara had spent months reading the hatchlings. Then Bryn spoke. Ours. One word, certain, not a question. The room was absolutely motionless. Even Draith's team had stopped moving. Somewhere behind Dara, a stylus hit the floor and nobody picked it up. Key had not moved from the center of the enclosure. Key, who observed everything and declared nothing, who had spent months building a picture of the world in silence. Key looked at the assembled aliens, looked at the observers with their recordings and their clipboards, looked at Draith, looked at Voss, looked at Orath. Then Key looked at the humans and spoke for the first time, not one word, three, the first complete sentence produced by a Draxoni hatchling outside their home world, in English, shaped imperfectly but aimed precisely. We chose them. The silence that followed was different from anything that had come before it. It was the silence of a room full of beings who were each, separately, recalculating something enormous. Dara became aware that she was not breathing normally. She fixed that quietly, without drawing attention to it. Voss had not moved. He was still standing beside the equipment case with Soli at eye level, and his face had the expression of a man who had been hit by something he didn't see coming and wasn't sure yet if it had hurt him or not. It had not hurt him, she could tell even from across the room. High Speaker Orath moved, not toward the hatchlings, not toward the exit. He moved deliberately to the center of the enclosure area and then slowly, in the way that ancient things do things that cost them nothing and mean everything, he knelt. One knee, head lowered, a gesture so controlled it was clearly intentional. Nobody in the room, not the aliens, not the humans, not even Draith, seemed to be breathing. Voss found his voice first. It was very small. That gesture, he whispered to no one in particular, that's in their culture, that's. He didn't finish, he didn't need to. Voss turned to Dara across the room, his voice barely carried. Did that just happen? Dara looked at the kneeling elder, at the three hatchlings who had chosen a word and a sentence and a side, at Key, who was still watching her with that steady, finished certainty. I think, she said quietly, that just happened. The recording reached the Galactic Council chambers in 4 hours. By the 6th hour, Every major civilization with a seat on the council had seen it. By the 8th, the secondary feeds, the ones that ran through diplomatic back channels and private networks, and the kind of servers that were never officially acknowledged, had carried it further still. By the time Dara woke up the next morning, the 3 words spoken by a dragon infant on a human station had traveled farther than any human ship had ever gone. She found out about this from Foss, who found out from a junior technician who had been monitoring incoming message traffic and had lost count somewhere past 300. The first thing Dara said was, 300 what? Incoming messages, Foss said. Diplomatic, scientific, press, well, whatever the alien equivalent of press is. Also several that I think are threats, but Voss is handling those. Dara sat down. The shape of the problem became clear over the next few hours, as Voss, pale, overcaffeinated, operating on something close to professional autopilot, explained what the first words actually meant in Draxoni law and biology. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was not a cultural greeting or an expression of fondness. The first words were a biological event, the moment a Draxoni hatchling's developing neural architecture permanently imprinted on the beings it had chosen. It was irreversible. It had no override. No Draxoni authority, no matter how senior, could dissolve it after the fact. In Draxoni law, which was very old and had never had cause to address this particular situation, the beings a hatchling chose in its first words became kin guardians, responsible for the young, connected to them, tied by a bond the Draxoni treated as equal to blood. 3 hatchlings had chosen humans, specific humans. Councillor Draith moved quickly. His formal statement to the council framed the first words as a manipulation, a deliberate effort by humanity to infiltrate Draxoni society by engineering a false bond. He used words like unprecedented access and biological leverage and the integrity of a sovereign culture. He called for an immediate investigation. He called for the hatchlings to be returned under supervised neutral care while the matter was resolved. The statement gained no traction. The footage made that difficult. You could watch the recording and reach many conclusions, but deliberate manipulation required you to ignore a great deal of what was visible, Foss waving at a hatchling because it had learned to expect it, Dara sitting on a floor in the dark because 30 days suddenly felt too short, Key's eyes moving across the room to find the humans before it spoke. Draith did not withdraw the statement. He simply stopped responding to questions about it. High Speaker Orath requested a private meeting with Dara. No recording, no translation team. The request specified just the 2 of them. Ro pulled Dara aside before she went in. You don't have to agree to terms, Ro said. You don't have to commit to anything. You can listen and give nothing. I know, Dara said. I mean it, whatever he offers, whatever he. Ro, Dara said, I know. She went in alone. The room was small and neutral, which she suspected was intentional. Orath was already there. He stood rather than sat, and when Dara entered, he looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. He spoke in Draxoni for nearly 10 minutes. She could not understand a word. She listened anyway, because listening was the only respectful option, and because something in the cadence of it reminded her, distantly, of the subaudible sounds Inez had found in the enclosure data, layered, complex, with a structure underneath the meaning. When he finished, there was a pause. Then slowly, in English that was accented and careful and clearly hard-won, he said, We believed no outside being could hold our young safely. We believed this without testing it. We were incorrect. Dara waited. You did not ask what you would receive, he continued. You asked only what they needed. She thought about the ferromagnetic ore, the cot outside the enclosure, 300 pages read aloud to creatures who had no reason to care. It seemed like the right order to do things, she said. He looked at her for another long moment. Yes, he said, it did. He left after that. She sat in the empty room for a while, not thinking about anything specific. The political ripple hit Earth's governing council the same evening. The communication that came through to Ro was not a celebration. It was measured, cautious, and deeply uncertain about the implications, because a species capable of bonding with Draxoni young was not a minor one. Several council members from other civilizations had already submitted formal arguments that humanity's probationary status needed review, not as a reward, as a recognition. There was a difference, and most of the people making the argument understood it. Voss, who was not involved in any of this, was sitting in the enclosure room when Dara found him. Soli was in the high perch, which was its place of choice when the station felt busy. Voss was on the floor below, back against the wall, looking up. "Any word?" he asked. "Several hundred," she said, and sat down next to him. "What happens to them now?" She had been thinking about this since the meeting with Orath. The convergence crisis was over. The Draxoni homeworld was stable. There was a 30-day window that had now become something else entirely, because Draxoni law did not allow Kingardians and bonded young to be separated without consent from both parties. The hatchlings had already said what they wanted. They had said it clearly, in front of witnesses, in a language they had learned, because no one told them they couldn't. "I don't know yet," Dara said, "but someone's going to ask us what we want, soon." Voss looked up at Soli. Soli looked back down at him. "Stay," Soli said from the perch, the same word, the same certain tone. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he said to the hatchling, not to Dara, "Yeah, I'm working on it." The question came on a Tuesday, the way all the important things seemed to. Voss delivered it formally, in writing, which told Dara everything about how serious it was. The Galactic Council required a decision from the Kingardians within 72 hours. The document explained, in the careful language of people who had never faced this situation before and were working very hard not to show it, that the biological bond was recognized, that Draxoni law was recognized, that humanity's provisional status on the Council was, for the duration of this matter, set aside in favor of the personal legal standing of the individuals involved. Which meant it was not a political decision, it was a personal one, and the Council needed an answer. Dara read the document 3 times. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She walked the station for a while, not going anywhere, just walking past the lab and the medical bay and the mess hall where a group of technicians were eating dinner and arguing about something that had nothing to do with interstellar politics. Ordinary life. It was still happening. She ended up outside the enclosure, which was where she usually ended up. Ro found her there an hour later. The Admiral stood next to her and looked through the barrier at the 3 hatchlings without saying anything for a while. Bryn was lying near the warmth panel. Soli was in the high perch. Key was sitting precisely in the center of the floor, awake, watching the door with the patience of something that has already made its decision and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Ro said. "Good," Dara said. "But I walked this station tonight." She paused. "I watched my crew." Dara waited. "Not one person I spoke to said no, not one. I asked 12 of them, and I didn't even tell them what I was asking about." Ro looked at Key, who was looking at both of them with calm attention. "Whatever it is you people have been doing in here for the last few months, it got into the whole station." She left after that. Dara stayed. The council convened 2 days later. The chamber was a remote session, screens and live feeds from a dozen different star systems, representatives from 43 species arranged in the gallery. Dara was present in person, which was unusual and slightly uncomfortable, and Voss was beside her, which made it better. Draith made his argument first. It was cleaner than before, which made it more dangerous. He had removed the manipulation language. Now he argued on grounds of precedent that allowing non-Draxoni Kingardianship would create instability in a cultural framework that had held for thousands of years, that the bond, however genuine, should be considered a medical anomaly rather than a legal foundation, that the interests of the hatchlings were best served by return to their own kind. He was not wrong about all of it. Some of what he said was true. Dara noticed that the argument was most persuasive when it did not have to account for the footage, and so she waited. Inez presented next. She had not been asked to. She had filed a request 2 days prior, and it had been granted, which surprised her more than anyone. She stood in front of the medical board section of the gallery and presented neurological data in language clean enough that even non-biologists could follow. The bond was not anomalous. It was the first words working exactly as Draxoni biology intended. The only thing anomalous was that the beings chosen were human. "You cannot legislate biology," Inez said. She did not raise her voice. She sat back down. Then it was Dara. She had not prepared remarks. Rowe had suggested she prepare remarks. Foss had offered to write them. She had declined both. She stood at the floor-level podium and looked at the gallery, dozens of alien faces, dozens of perspectives, 43 different calculations running behind 43 different pairs of eyes, and said what she actually thought. She said that she had walked into this assignment with a briefing packet and a thin knowledge base and no real plan except to pay attention and try not to get it wrong. She said the hatchlings had taught her more than she had taught them. She said she could not speak to Draxoni law or council precedent or the political weight of what had happened, but she could say this: when something small and frightened reaches toward you, you don't hand it back because it's inconvenient. You figure out what it needs. You stay up, you improvise, you sit on the floor in the dark if that's what it takes. She said that is not a policy, it is not a strategy, it is just the thing humans do. She sat down. Foss passed her a folded note. She opened it. It said, "Good." She put it in her pocket with the document. The council voted. It was not unanimous. 31 in favor, 12 against. The abstentions did not matter. The threshold was met. Humanity's first non-Draxoni Kingardians were formally recognized under Draxoni law and galactic statute. The ceremony with Orath was short. He spoke. A formal phrase in Draxoni, then translated, an acknowledgement of the bond, an acceptance of its permanence. He placed a small object in Dara's hands, then Foss's, old and dense and warm to the touch, though it had not been heated. She would find out later it was a traditional Draxoni marker of lineage, something given to family. Hearthlight was quiet that evening. The political traffic had slowed. The feeds had moved on to other things. The crisis was officially resolved, the hatchlings officially documented, the situation officially categorized in whatever filing system the Galactic Council used for things that had no prior category. In the enclosure, the lights had been adjusted to the temperature the hatchlings preferred. The space had been expanded, more room, better perches, a section of floor that had been refitted with magnetic panels after Soli's or preferences became a permanent dietary fact. There were small things scattered through the space that the hatchlings had claimed as their own over months. A calibration tool, a worn equipment strap, a copy of the book Dara had been reading aloud since winter. Key sat in the center of the floor, as always, but the gaze was not cataloging now. It was resting, still taking in the room, still aware of everything. Key would probably always be aware of everything, but without the urgency of a creature that is trying to understand a world that might not keep it. Foss was on the cot. He had moved it inside the enclosure proper weeks ago, with permission. He was almost asleep. Soli was in the high perch, one eye half open, keeping watch in the easy way of things that are comfortable. Bryn was near the door, as usual, near Dara. She was writing up her notes, and Bryn was lying with that low, constant warmth radiating outward, the kind of warmth that had stopped feeling strange somewhere around month 2. Kay spoke. Not 3 words this time, Maury. The hatchlings had been learning quickly and Key most of all. The sentence was longer, shaped carefully, aimed at no one in the room and at all of them at once. "We did not know," Key said slowly, "that outside could feel like this." Dara stopped writing. Foss had gone still on the cot. The room held the words for a moment, then slowly shifted in the high perch, tucking tighter. Bryn exhaled slowly against the warmth panel, and Dara looked at Key, and Key looked back at her with those steady amber eyes, and neither of them said anything else. There was nothing else that needed saying. The enclosure was warm, the station was quiet, and for the first time in the known history of the galaxy, 3 dragon infants were exactly where they had chosen to be.